All right, let's jump into this final one. You're going to be very much interested. The City Council of Hamtramck, Michigan, which is a city outside of the Detroit area, Detroit suburb, with, by the way, a substantial Muslim population. Well, that city council voted unanimously yesterday to allow only 5 flags to be on display publicly on their flagpoles. The American flag, the Michigan flag, and or flags representing the native county of many immigrant residents within that community. But what is interesting is not included in their list of flags that are permitted is the pride flag. Of course, that has stroked a degree of outrage from many who are demanding that the rainbow flag adorn every public facility from the White House all the way down. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Roger Gannam. He's the Vice President of Legal Affairs at Liberty Counsel. And last year, Liberty Counsel won a unanimous U.S. Supreme Court decision that the city of Boston illegally censored Christian viewpoints by denying flying the Christian flag in a public forum that was open to everyone. Well, Roger, thank you so much for joining us this evening on Washington Watch.
Thanks for having me, Jody. Glad to be here.
Well, it's our honor to have you. We appreciate it. Well, let's start. Liberty Counsel, you all won a major victory last year in Boston. So let's start, if we can, kind of compare the situation that Liberty Counsel was involved in Boston and the Christian flag compared to that's happening now with the City Council in Michigan.
Sure. Boston, for a long time, for years, had a program where literally any outside group who asked to be able to raise their flag on one of the City Hall flagpoles was allowed to do it. And Boston never said no until our client, called Camp Constitution, ironically, came along and asked to be able to raise a Christian flag to celebrate the contributions of the Christian community to Boston history and Massachusetts history. And Boston got in trouble because when you open a forum to everyone, you can't censor the Christian viewpoint. That's what Boston did, and that's why we won our case 9-0 in the Supreme Court. What the City Council in Hamtramck, Michigan has done is realize that when you display a pride flag, when a government flies a pride flag, the government is communicating a particular viewpoint about sexual conduct and really what it means to be a man or a woman in a way that is inconsistent with the religious beliefs of maybe even a majority of the population, if not a substantial number. And so what the City Council in Hamtramck decided to do is just simply not take a position on these issues of sexuality, which is really a wise thing to do. It's always been the case that the government can fly whatever flags it wants to. When a government gets in trouble is when it starts letting outside groups fly their flags and then starts picking the winners and losers about who can fly their flags and who can't.
Well, I think that's a great point, and let me just kind of underscore it again. I think it's very notable, an important fact in all of this, that the City Council did not ban any specific flag, but rather what they did, they limited what kind of flags could be on display. They limited it to 5 flags. They didn't specifically ban anything. How significant is that approach, do you think?
Well, it represents a lot of wisdom. I think cities and towns are waking up to the fact that flying pride flags is communicating a particular viewpoint that doesn't represent the entirety of the community. Before our case in the Supreme Court, I think a lot of cities and towns would fly pride flags, not necessarily because they wanted to or wanted to communicate what the flag stands for, but I think they were just afraid of what would happen to them or what would be said about them if they said no. Our case has really opened their eyes and let them see that they're picking winners and losers. Our client, Camp Constitution, wouldn't have gone to the city of Boston and demanded to fly a Christian flag if Boston wasn't letting literally everyone else fly their flags. What we saw in the footage from the Hamtramck City Council meeting is people who want the pride flag to be flown are there pounding their fists on the lectern and demanding it, even though they would be surely offended if the city flew a Christian flag. So I think cities and towns are waking up to the fact that they can't be viewpoint censors, and they can't be picking winners and losers in these fights. And it's just better and wiser for them to fly the American flag or their city flag and not get involved in these cultural disputes.
Yeah, absolutely. Tremendous amount of wisdom in all of that, especially these days. You just simply can't please everyone. And it is a statement that's being made when those flags are flown. Let me ask you this. Last weekend, I'm sure you're very much on top of this, as the White House obviously drew a lot of heat when they displayed the so-called pride flag at the same height as two American flags that were flanking it. And as a result, Senator Roger Marshall has proposed a One Flag for All Act, which would make it illegal to fly or drape or display any flag other than our nation's flag on federal buildings or properties. There were a few exceptions, but overall with that bill, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a travesty that the one building that really kind of represents our American government to much of the world, the White House, would choose to not only fly a pride flag, but do it in a way that government regulations clearly show is improper. It relegated the United States flag to a secondary position under or next to the pride flag. It's really inexcusable for a president of the United States to do something like that. As for the proposed legislation, I think it makes sense for the United States government to have very clear parameters and clear rules about what flags can be flown in addition to the United States flag. But it should never be a flag instead of the United States flag. And again, flying a pride flag is really sending a message to America's Christians and many adherents of other faiths that their viewpoint about human sexuality is not welcome or celebrated, but a very particular LGBT viewpoint is celebrated. And that's something that the United States government, the president of the United States, should not be doing.
Absolutely, and I think you bring up a great point with the flag etiquette. I mean, it's known that the U.S. flag is to fly higher than any other flag, period. And for them to place the pride flag on equal setting was just, I mean, it's offensive enough just having it, but to place it on equal par with the U.S. flag is patriotically offensive, even for those who may not have an opinion one way or the other on the pride issue, but just the flag etiquette of our country being disrespected so is in itself tremendously offensive. Let me ask you this. Let's go back to Hamtramck's situation there. I wanted your opinion on this, that the vast majority of the people in that community are Muslims that passed this resolution. How significant do you think that is in this whole case?
I think it's really interesting, and it demonstrates what America's promise has always been about. As I understand it, all of the city council members in Hamtramck are Muslim. And that's pretty remarkable that an immigrant community who practices a religion that's in the minority in the United States, nonetheless were able to win the trust and support of the entire community and elect an all-Muslim city council. But notice that the city council did not decide to fly a Muslim flag or say that we have now taken this city or this town for Islam. They made a policy that says we're not going to pick winners and losers. And it really is a great exhibition of what America's promise is, that people from many races, backgrounds, religions can all have access to elected government and can be governed in a way that doesn't pick winners and losers when it comes to viewpoints. So I think it's remarkable. I think it's encouraging, and it gives me optimism that there are places, especially locally, that still get it. And there's a saying that all politics is local, and here we see how a local municipality or town is teaching the rest of us a lesson about how pluralism is supposed to work.
Well, that's a great point. In all honesty, I was looking at it personally from not only what you said, I went down that path mentally, but I also looked at it from the perspective of here, at least not within their community, but nationally, Muslims don't make up a large percentage of this country. They do in that community, obviously. But I was looking at this whole issue from the perspective of what would happen if the church stood up and made its voice known, be it this issue or multiple other issues that our country is facing right now. When the people rise up and let their voices be heard, things happen. Significant things happen. Do you think there is a message in all of this to the church as a whole?
I think there is. As a Christian, I believe the gospel is certainly a message of personal salvation in Jesus Christ. But the gospel is also a message of redemption of all of creation for the glory of God. And so I think as Christians, we are called to take the gospel into government, to take it into our local seats of power, not to impose Christianity on the population, but to bring God's ideas of what works, of what is good for humanity, what will make us flourish, and ultimately what will bring us joy and contentment. I think as Christians, we're called to bring those ideas to all institutions, whether it's government, whether it's education, and be salt and light everywhere, because ultimately all of creation is crying out for the return of Christ, and the gospel really is the message of that plan of redemption for all of creation, and that's where we as Christians ought to be sharing the whole counsel of God, really fulfilling the Great Commission. So I think this is a message to the church that we are also called to seek elected positions and to bring the Great Commission to bear, again, not imposing our will or our beliefs on our fellow citizens, but proposing the way forward as God has instructed us.
Well, and by definition, really, that's what it means to be salt and light. I mean, it is impossible to be salt and light without being engaged. I mean, by definition, that's what it means to be salt and light. And I think it's a travesty that for so long, by and large, not with everyone, of course, but by and large, it seems as though the church has surrendered politics to others. And as a result, we are largely in the mess we're in now because the church has been so absent from this area of our country. And God, by the way, instituted government. This is not a man-made thing. God instituted the family, he instituted the church, and he instituted government. And Christians need to have a voice there. And in this country, even more so, our system doesn't work without involvement from the people. So what would you say if Christians don't speak up? Is it fair to say that if they don't speak up, if they don't get involved, that someone else will?
Absolutely. I'm reminded of the instructions from the prophet Jeremiah to Israel when it was in exile, and they were told to in the place where they were, in the city in which they were in exile, to go ahead and build houses and marry and give their sons and daughters in marriage, and to seek the welfare of the city in which they lived, because in its welfare, they would find their own welfare. I think that same pattern holds up today. Wherever we are as the church, we're to seek the welfare of the place where we live. And we know that God has given us instructions for how humans are to live and how we are to flourish. And we ought not be shy about sharing those things with all of our neighbors, not for our good, but for everyone's good, because we will find that as a church that we will thrive if the cities in which we live are thriving, and we know the way to make that happen. So I think it's extremely important, as you've pointed out, for our ideas to be out there, because in the public sphere, in the marketplace, the truth will always win. Will always be able to hold its own. And if we're not out there speaking, someone else will.
Roger, we've got about 15 seconds here real quickly. They're facing some pushback, the city council. What do you think is going to happen? Are they going to stand firm?
I expect they will. At least that's the sense that I get. I think that there ought not be winners and losers when it comes to the government deciding who gets to speak. And this council has so far charted the right course.
Thank you, Roger Gannam with Liberty Counsel. It's an honor to have you on the program this evening. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.